So South Park just went after everything again, and it was kind of a beautiful mess. After their crazy comeback episode that took swings at Paramount, Trump, and right-wing culture in general, I was kind of expecting the show to settle down and start covering one topic at a time. But nope. I guess they have a lot to say, cause this episode was a lot. And by a lot, I mean they covered ICE, Kristi Noem, Charlie Kirk, right-wing grifters, Epstein, the state of our economy, and of course, the Trump administration.
Oh, thank you, Mr. President.
What does it fantasy, boss? Hey, will you get out of here?
Yeah, there's a lot going on there. Now I think it goes without saying that Got a Nut picks up right where Sermon on the Mount left off. Jesus is still in schools, PC Principal is still Power Christian Principal, Cartman is still pissed off about other people stealing his shtick, and of course the new Saddam Hussein version of Trump is back on full display. So there's definitely a sense of continuity here. But don't worry, we're not back in season 20 or anything. I know how scary the word continuity is for South Park fans, but you can relax. There's no overarching story here. This is not serialization. This is still like classic South Park more than anything else. We're just getting a bit of thematic carryover. But if there is anything that has returned, it's that we're back to getting the hyper-political version of South Park. Because this is probably the most on the pulse the show has been in a very long time. And if these first two episodes are any indication of what's to come, it's gonna be one of the most political seasons in the entire show. Now I have some mixed feelings about that because I'm an opinionated boy, but we'll get into that a bit later when I do my personal review of the episode. First, I want to start by explaining the context behind the story and give a general rundown of how it all unfolds. Then we can get into my critiques. Now even though this episode has a very political focus, its jumping off point is actually something that's not very controversial, which is that people gotta get their nut.
Steam subscriptions, Netflix, HBO, you want to order DoorDash? My nut's about $60 a week. So, you know, as a kid, if you could do a podcast, say some really divisive then you could make your nut.
Now for those of you who don't know, getting your monthly nut just means covering your essential monthly expenses, which is something that applies to everybody. So I think it's a good and relatable way to set up an episode like this. The economy sucks right now, it's difficult to find work, food is insanely expensive, it's not easy to get your nut these days. And that concept is what kicks off the two main stories we get here. Clyde and Cartman doing these divisive, ultra-conservative podcasts, and Mr. Mackey joining ICE. Now first of all, I gotta say, Clyde having an offensive podcast was a great misdirection. And it was also a really funny way of continuing the narrative from the previous episode where Cartman feels replaced by the cultural changes in America. Because when this episode starts, Kyle and Wendy are complaining about the horrible stuff being said on the podcast, and you kind of just assume that it's about Cartman, especially given the history we have with his character and the teaser for the episode that shows him looking like Charlie Kirk. But instead, it's Clyde who the whole school's upset with, not Cartman. And seeing that really pisses off Cartman because he feels like Clyde is just stealing his entire thing right down to the catchphrase.
Are you serious? People are sponsoring you for ripping me off? And it's really just the best way to get ripped quick, so be sure to get some, and also be sure to hashtag respect Clyde's authority. What?
You gotta love how mad Cartman gets about this. Really feels like Trey and Matt are just completely bewildered by the fact that there are people today who openly sound like Cartman when they speak. Now, interestingly, even though Clyde has a very important role in this episode, especially towards the end, the focus really quickly shifts towards Cartman, who retaliates against Clyde by starting his own podcast out of anger. And like you'd think they'd turn this into a competition between them or something, but they don't. It pretty much just immediately jumps into Cartman being this Charlie Kirk stand-in and forgets about Clyde almost entirely. Which I gotta say is definitely a weird direction to go in, because I feel like there was a lot of potential here to turn this into an interesting character-driven story, especially since Clyde was stealing Cartman's shtick. But they don't really do a character thing here. Instead, what we get is a recreation of what Charlie Kirk does on his show, which is debating random students on subject matter that they're woefully unprepared to talk about.
If a pregnant woman is killed and the baby dies too, why is the killer charged with a double homicide?
Well, because people have different beliefs.
It's not about belief, it's about truth. Science confirms life begins at conception.
Now, because this side of the episode is almost all parody and no plot, there isn't really that much to say here. Cartman basically just continues to act like Charlie Kirk, debating college students from his laptop at home, which in typical South Park fashion is turned into a roast through silly metaphor. And we really get the gist of this when his mom knocks on the bathroom door to check on him, only for him to tell her that he's busy master debating to college girls. I'm like, yeah, it's an extremely straightforward joke to be making. They're saying that Charlie Kirk's process of targeting people who are uninformed for an easy slam dunk is a very masturbatory process. He's really getting himself off with the clips he's farming. But either way, it got a few chuckles out of me, and let's be real, that's pretty much exactly what those campus debate videos really do feel like. A guy who is flexing his knowledge on a bunch of crappy opponents. You know, it's like a Steven Crowder thing, except without the wife abuse, allegedly. Now, having said all that, I do like how they rope Clyde back into the story later in the episode, because when Cartman gets nominated for the Charlie Kirk Award for Young Master Debaters, Clyde is actually the one who wins it, landing him a free trip to Lago and this hilarious victory speech.
Thanks, everyone. The Civil Rights Act was a huge mistake, and, I don't know, lesbians are an abomination of God. You all stole my stick! Yeah.
Wow. Truly the voice of a generation. Now for me, I really enjoy that Clyde wins here because at the start of the episode, he fully admits to doing his podcast as a grift to make money. Whereas for Cartman, that's actually the person he is. He genuinely believes all the stuff he says. And so I see that as a little meta commentary on how South Park has now been outpaced by the rest of the internet. But yeah, aside from the last few minutes of this episode, that's pretty much all there is to the Master Debater storyline. So in a lot of ways, it feels more like an extended gag than an actual B-plot. But before I can talk about how that story ends, I kinda need to talk about the main plot with Mr. Mackey, because it all sorta comes together in the end. And that brings us back to the jumping off point, where Clyde tells Mackey about getting his nut. Because immediately after that conversation ends, PC Principal fires Mr. Mackey due to budget cuts. And once he loses his job, we get a scene where our old friend from the bank tells Mr. Mackey that he needs about $8,000 a month to keep up with his expenses. Which seems like a crazy high number to me, but I guess South Park has that insane mortgage rate, I don't know. Anyways, this leads Mr. Mackey to begrudgingly join ICE because they offer a $100,000 salary and a $50,000 signing bonus, which by the way is not far off from the truth. ICE actually does pay a load of money to new agents, presumably because everybody hates them right now and they're desperate for new recruits.
We don't ask for experience, just show up. We don't care if you've read a book or grown up.
Now I gotta say, I think it's really funny that in the days leading up to this episode, ICE actually tweeted a screenshot of the South Park teaser alongside a link to joining them. And that's funny to me because it played right into South Park's hands. This episode makes fun of ICE for being desperate, and that move made them look very desperate, which is hilarious. Now given everything that's been going on and the general public sentiment towards ICE, I'm guessing that people are really gonna like this storyline, because it really on ICE. Like, they are depicted as being comically evil, and you might be tempted to say that they are comically evil, but trust me, this episode takes it to another level. Because not only are they pretty much terrorizing people, causing bloodshed and chaos everywhere they go, but they'll do stuff like raiding a Dora the Explorer show, ripping families apart from within their seats. Or my personal favorite, they'll go into heaven and take literal dead people into their vans for questioning.
I just need to ask you some questions, okay? Make sure you're legal. How did you get into heaven?
I was really nice to people, and I helped various charities.
Now that was probably the funniest part of the episode for me because it's just such a perfectly South Park moment. It's just so ridiculous that they were able to drive into heaven. Though I gotta admit, I was a little sad that we didn't get to see God, was hoping he'd grace us with his majestic glory. Now, as far as their criticism of ICE, nobody gets it worse than Kristi Noem, who is basically used as the spokesperson for the organization. Their critique of her is extremely on the nose, or should I say, off the nose. Because throughout this thing, her face is constantly melting off and then repeatedly getting fixed back on by a crew of makeup people. Now, I don't know if they ran with that gag just because she looks very plastic or because they're making a statement about how the face of ICE doesn't actually have a real face. But either way, I thought it was a really hilarious gag that got me pretty much every single time it happened. But if you don't like Kristi and that's not enough for you, don't you worry. That's not the only shot they take. Because some of you more observant viewers might notice, if you look really carefully, that every time she's in a scene, she kills dogs. Yeah, I'm not gonna show footage of that just in case YouTube won't let me, but Jesus Christ, that gag was savage. And if you don't know why they did that, it's because in her book, she admitted to putting down her own dog because it was too wild and untrainable, which is just like a super up response. Anyways, while the episode is very harsh on ICE as an organization, I actually think they took an unexpectedly nuanced approach to the situation by humanizing some of the people that work for it, mainly through Mr. Mackey. Now, as viewers of the show, we know that Mr. Mackey is a relatively good person, and he even objects to the idea of joining ICE when the guy at the bank suggests it to him. But at the end of the day, he's got an $8,000 nut and no other job to make it with, so he joins them. For better or for worse, it's his only option. And we see that he clearly doesn't like doing it. He even apologizes to the people he detains at one point, but he's stuck in that position no matter what he does. Just like all the other schmoes we see joining ICE in the episode for the large salary and signing bonus. Now, obviously, this doesn't excuse the organization in any way for any of the that they're doing right now. And I think this episode still remains very harsh with its criticisms about that. But I did feel that by putting Mr. Mackey in the situation, they were adding a layer of complexity to the picture. It's not just a broad sweeping brushstroke. There's a bit of devil's advocate in there as well. But of course, none of that actually really matters because we find out towards the end of the episode that it's all basically for nothing. Because when Mackey goes back to the bank the next week, he finds out that he still hasn't made his nut.
Yes, and your nut's up to about 12 grand a month.
But my nut was only 8 grand a week ago.
Right, but you got a good paying job. You see, as you make more money, your nut actually gets bigger.
God, that scene is too real. How does anyone afford anything anymore? Anyways, this is the point in the episode where the two storylines finally converge. Mackey's ICE stuff and Clyde's podcast stuff. Because as a reward for rounding up so many Mexicans, Mackey is also sent to Mar-a-Lago where the president is going to help him out with his nut. And of course, while there, he encounters Clyde, who's kinda just chilling, doing nothing after winning the Charlie Kirk Award. Now, for the most part, these last few minutes of the episode feel weirdly out of place. Like, there's just so much going on with this setting that feels deeply underused. We get a weird horror movie moment. We see Dora giving an old man a massage, which is pretty obviously a nod to the Trump Epstein thing. And in a lot of ways, it kind of feels like they just wanted an excuse to show more of Trump and Satan because they were such a hit in the last episode. So just throwing all this stuff together for the last 2 minutes makes it feel really clunky. But for the purpose of reaching a narrative conclusion, we do get a nice confrontation between Mackey and Clyde that mirrors the start of the episode and sort of acts as a bookend. And I only say sort of because there's actually this super bizarre chase scene that happens right after their confrontation, which feels like something out of The Substance. But yeah, before any of that, we get this nice moment where Mackey sits down in front of Clyde and gets to act as his counselor once again, leading to a sentimental speech about sticking to your principles.
But if you're doing something you don't really believe in, just to make your nut, you're gonna find that you just get sadder and your nut just gets bigger.
Now, first of all, is that the Okama Game Sphere in the background? F your principles, I bet that has Donkey Kong Bonanza 2 on it. Nah, but I have some thoughts about this final speech that I'd like to say, but we're gonna get to that soon, saving that part for my review portion of the video. But yeah, that talk isn't actually the end of the episode, because the real end is Mackey and Clyde making an escape from Mar-a-Lago, as Kristi Noem's face goes insane. And it's a really weird, abrupt ending, where they just fix up Kristi's face and start singing the Lulu song from Peanuts, all while congratulating themselves for another job well done. Honestly, it's an extremely weird end that I have no idea what to make of. I mean, I guess it's supposed to be like a bleak, nothing is gonna change kind of thing. Honestly, it just comes off feeling like this weirdly abrupt and rush ending that I have no idea what to make of. But anyways, now that I've sufficiently explained the episode, we can finally get to my review portion. Matter of fact, let's do a whole ass dramatic text box thing to really emphasize that we're in a new section of the video. Yeah, that's the stuff right there. Okay, so first of all, I thought the episode was very funny, and I thought the jokes about ICE and Kristi Noem were especially strong because they kept taking it to such ridiculous places. Detaining people in heaven, shooting dogs, her face falling off. This is South Park getting mean with its satire, and let's be real, that's when their satire is at its best. It's why we all love Jennifer Lopez, and it's why I got so many laughs out of this episode. Plus, the fact that ICE just immediately goes from training to raiding is a pretty great little quick joke that they throw in there.
We hope you enjoyed the presentation. Please step through to the vehicles for your first raid.
But having said that, not every joke completely landed for me. For example, I felt like the inclusion of Trump was really forced and unnecessary this time around. Like, did he actually add anything to the episode? I don't think so. And so even though I really like the Saddam Hussein version of his character, the jokes that involved him didn't hit as hard for that reason. They just felt unearned because they didn't actually have a meaningful place in the story. And look, I get that they're maybe going for an omnipresent thing where Trump and his influence are always around in this new season. I mean, they did have a Trump portrait in the ICE office at one point, but I don't know, it just felt forced to me this time. Like they just had to include him because of how much attention it got them last time. Though I will say I did enjoy their little version of JD Vance, and I like that he was literally helping helping Trump the devil, seeing that new character model and hearing that voice made it a little more novel for me. I just hope that we're not going to be seeing them in every single episode this season. And if we are, then I gotta say, I hope we get to see Satan do more than just lie in bed and read books. I mean, dude is like one of my favorite characters of the show. He deserves a little more agency, you know? Like maybe get into how he ended up with Trump or do an episode about them breaking up. I don't know. Just please do more than this.
I just want to go. This place is gross.
Would you like me to apply the baby oil to Satan's asshole, boss?
Also, while we're on the subject of complaining about characters, does anyone else feel like Stan, Kyle, and Kenny are getting like no screen time? We've had maybe 5 lines from Stan, 2 from Kyle, and 1 from Kenny in this entire season so far. And these are supposed to be the main characters of the show. I find that kind of weird considering that we're now 20% done with this new season. So hopefully this is not a trend for future episodes. But you know, then again, maybe this is just a symptom of a bigger problem, which is that the show is getting a bit too political. And yeah, I know, South Park has almost always been heavy on the cultural and political satire, but if you ask me, I think the show's at its best when we're getting stories that focus on the characters and the town in a way that mixes in with current events. Not stories that are current events mixed in with the characters in the town. You know what I mean? Noem saying? Like, I felt that seasons 25 and 26 did a really great job of keeping things more insulated to the world of South Park, all while managing to still be relevant and funny. But right now, I'm not really getting that with season 27, and I think that's leading to fewer appearances from Stan, Kyle, and Kenny because the stories aren't being written with them in mind. They're being written with the news in mind. Now, like, sure, on one hand, that's great because nobody can do cultural satire like South Park, but at the same time, that's not always what I want from this show. Sometimes I just want a good old-fashioned episode like Dick and Bow's, Casa Bonita, or Good Times with Weapons. It doesn't always have to be about current events, you know? But even with all that in mind, I think my biggest criticism has to be the ending of this episode. Because at face value, when you break it down, it really doesn't work well. Like, we get this speech from Mackey to Clyde about how it's not worth compromising on your principles to get your nut, but the second you ask any questions, that premise immediately falls apart. Like, for example, what is Mr. Mackey supposed to do now? He joined ICE because he has $8,000 in monthly expenses to cover. He's gonna have to pay for it somehow, and it's not like he can just go back to being a school counselor. He lost his job because of budget cuts. So is maintaining your principles actually a feasible thing to do in the world they depict? Is it even feasible for the average person watching this episode who needs to make a living to get by? The whole thing just comes off as way too idealistic for me, which makes it feel out of touch, which is a rare L for South Park. They're usually pretty spot on with these kinds of things. And that's not even getting into how disconnected the message feels from the rest of the episode. Like, was Cartman doing it for the nut? No, being an asshole just is what he's passionate about. And maybe we're supposed to interpret the Mackey stuff as discouragement from joining ICE, but I don't know, man. If someone is joining because they're broke and in debt, it feels kind of weird to have 2 billionaires tell them to find money elsewhere. Even though I do agree that there are more ethical ways to get paid. But having said all that, overall, the episode was still very funny and enjoyable to watch, and I think that's the important takeaway here. So even though it's got its flaws and it wasn't as tightly written as the season opener, and the last few minutes were kind of a mess, it was still a decently strong episode for the show, and it had some really strong gags that had me laughing pretty much the whole way through. So for that reason, despite all of the flaws, I think I can comfortably say that I'm happy with what we got, and that I'm looking forward to watching episode 3 whenever that comes out. But so help me God, it better have Stan, Kyle, and Kenny.